הניסים ועל החורבן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות, על הניסים ועל החורבן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה, בזמן הזה שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה.
Welcome to Jewish Life, a program presented in cooperation with the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. I'm your host, Stewart Ain. Every week we present programs of particular interest to the Jewish community. And today, a program of interest to the entire community. And it's something we've never done before. We're going to take a tour of a museum. This is the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanities Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. And my guests are the Executive Director and CEO, Sarah Weiss, and Lilly Kurtz. She arrived in Cincinnati via Union Terminal, where both Lilly and Sarah are right now. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us.
Great, great. Why are we in Union Terminal?
Thank you for that question, and welcome to Cincinnati. First of all, Union Terminal is a historic train station here in our community, and in the 1930s and 40s was a hub of action and transportation. And at this train station, 1 in 5 World War II servicemen and women came through this building at some point during that war era. And we also know that a majority of Holocaust survivors who came to this community actually arrived via Union Terminal. And so our museum is now housed in this historic building, which also houses other museums, a history museum, a natural history museum, but it's a fitting place for our Holocaust and Humanities Center because of the authentic connection to the building.
Right. It's what's called the Cincinnati Museum Center with a whole bunch of different museums in there, right? Children's
Absolutely.
Museum, etc. Right.
Yeah.
So and you folks moved there in January of 2019. Is that right?
Correct. We've just been here about a year and a half.
Right. So and you've got a lot of space down there, right?
Yes, absolutely. We have 7,500 square feet of permanent exhibition space and many other collection spaces and programming spaces available to us.
Good. So where are you located now? You're in the central terminal, I guess, waiting area of the train. And where's the museum? Downstairs?
So all of the museums are actually downstairs. You enter this train station on the 3rd floor, and then everything else is built down. So we are standing in what is the Grand Rotunda, where, again, as a bustling train station, this would have been full of passengers and people to actually pick up folks. And this is where all of the action happened and really the hub of this building that now houses these museums.
Right. And Lilly, you came through the station to when you arrived from overseas, right?
I was born in Munich, Germany in 1948. This was after the war. My parents had married, and we came here to Cincinnati early 1952. I was not quite 4 years old. And we came to Cincinnati via New Orleans. We came by boat from Europe to New Orleans and then boarded a train. It was my mother, my father, an aunt and an uncle, and we came to this terminal. And we came here because my father had been sponsored, and that's the only way you could come to the States, by someone who could give him a job. And we had lodging, and that's how we came here. We came through this rotunda, and the fact that the museum has ended up here is just full circle. And not only myself, but so many other survivors and survivor children feel that this is home. We actually have a home.
Do you actually remember it when you came? You were 4 years old. Do you
No.
remember?
No, I remember a little bit of the crossing on the boat, but I really don't remember anything of the travel to New Orleans and then from New Orleans to Cincinnati, unfortunately.
Right. But Sarah, you said many people from Europe did come in through the train station. Is that right?
Correct. Many came as refugees either before the war in the mid to late 1930s, and then of course another wave came in the late 40s into the mid 50s. And again, a majority of those survivors came through Union Terminal. Many of them do have memories of arriving here. Unfortunately, Lily's parents are not living.
No.
But I imagine they have some memory of arriving here.
Yes, I mean, as you can imagine, we spoke in the house. I only spoke German coming here. My parents spoke German, Polish, and Yiddish. They were born in Poland, and after the war, they settled in Munich. And my father had a business in Munich, but decided because of what had happened, he wanted a better future for me. So they made the journey. They heard from other people who had already come to Cincinnati. It was a good place. There were jobs available, and they were very brave and just packed up and not knowing language, not knowing customs, and came here.
We have one survivor whose testimony talks about, I heard Cincinnati was a German city because it's a largely German, was settled by German immigrants. And so I heard it was a German city. And when I arrived at Union Terminal, nobody spoke German. So, there are all kinds of stories that the survivors have.
Right. So, okay, so how do you get to the museum? Let's take a look.
So we're gonna take you into the museum right now, and we'll head down there.
Okay, now here we are in the museum. What are you in front of, Sarah?
So I took us straight into the museum, and I'm standing in front of an installation called Mosaic. And here at our center, we're really committed to humanizing this history and localizing it. And so Mosaic is an installation about Jewish life before the war. And again, the Nazis, their goal was to dehumanize, and our responsibility is to give that humanity back. So often when we study the Holocaust, images of emaciated bodies and individuals come to mind, but we really want people to understand that before Jews were victims, they were human beings and people just like us with hopes and dreams and fears. And so what you're seeing, the stills, well, actually now you're seeing video footage. This is actually rare video footage compiled from both Eastern and Western Europe in that interwar period. We have several different film reels that play, and then in a moment you'll see it switch and you'll see still photographs. And these still photographs are all from our archives. They're all photographs of individuals who have some connection to the greater Cincinnati community. So perhaps somebody in the photograph survived and came here, or perhaps they're a relative of somebody who survived in Cincinnati and came to Cincinnati. So localizing and humanizing is really an intentional part of this experience, especially given that we have this authentic connection to this site. And so connecting to the building and telling these stories of rebuilding and how people had the resilience to overcome their lives is sort of the circular way in which we approach. But this is the start of it, and in that humanization.
There are about, 20 museums, Holocaust museums in the country now?
Approximately, yes, and many other centers and Holocaust exhibits, but yes.
Right, and what's the nearest ones to you?
The nearest ones to us are to the north, Detroit. Detroit has a Holocaust museum. And then to the west, the nearest is in Skokie, which is just outside of Chicago. We are the only Holocaust museum in Ohio, and there's not a whole lot if you go direct south. Detroit and Chicago are the closest.
Right, right. And who comes to see the exhibit?
So all different folks. Of course, our primary focus and audience is students and school groups and teachers. And so we have thousands of students that come, but we have lots of people from the general public from all over Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky. Since we opened a year ago, over a year ago, we have had visitors from 49 of the 50 states. So we are getting visitors from across the country as well, because Cincinnati Museum Center and Union Terminal, the building that we started with, is such an iconic part of our city. And so it gives us the opportunity to reach people who might not have even expected to walk into a Holocaust museum, but they're in this building, they're visiting, and they see that we're here and they have the opportunity to visit. Right now, of course, due to COVID, we were temporarily closed for several months. We've just reopened with significant guidelines around numbers of visitors and cleaning procedures. And what we're seeing is that we're seeing a lot of families come and a lot of young people come and seeking us out in this moment.
Right. Different religions too?
Absolutely. We estimate that we don't know, we don't ask when they buy a ticket. However, we estimate that approximately 90% of our visitors are not Jewish.
Right, right. So if I was going to go to the Cincinnati Museum Center and I wanted to see the Children's Museum, the Duke Energy Children's Museum, what are the chances I would end up also visiting the Holocaust Museum?
It just depends. It depends when you're buying your tickets at the entrance, and they're telling you about the different experiences in the museum center. We're seeing right now that a lot of people coming in are adding on a visit to the museum, to our museum. But if you have very small children, of course, we don't recommend our museum for children under ages 11. Not that we won't let young children in, and we specifically designed the museum so that any of the graphic imagery is actually kind of in a way portrayed and seen at a higher level, a higher viewing level, or behind a wall or something that you have to look a little bit to see it, because we knew that that would happen, that visitors who were visiting the Children's Museum might bring their young children. And this was designed really for, again, children ages 11 and above, but we wanted to make it accessible to any family that wanted to come.
What's the most popular, if that's a good word to use, exhibit?
So we'll do a little bit of a view, and then I'm going to move to a different location in a moment. But one thing I'll mention that's also unique as we move to what is, I think, I don't want to say the most popular, but the exhibit that I think really people talk about and stays with them in a moment. But all of the exhibits are designed to unfold in layers. And that is because the history unfolds in layers. And the more, as you know, and you've researched this, the more you begin to learn, the more there is to know. And so that's something that a lot of people talk about, is they're surprised by the interactivity. So what you're seeing is one of our installations on power, which talks about the Nazi rise to power, of course, and propaganda and Nazi manipulation of schools and books and newspapers and all of these sorts of things, but it unfolds. So first you see, actually, the image you saw was of the Nuremberg rally, and then you see the Nuremberg chart. And we explained to young people about what this chart means and how it relates to the Nuremberg laws, and also making connections between the Nuremberg laws and the Jim Crow laws in America. And then we used a lot of, again, interactivity, a lot of quotes directly from witnesses. So in this power installation, there's a quote, I don't know if you can see it, but you'll see it as we pass. It says, "The Holocaust didn't start with bullets. It started with words." And this is from one of our local survivors that's still very active. And so I just wanted to make that note as we go to that space, which visitors often talk about, of how we design this and how it is interactive. So we're going to move through the gallery. And you're seeing some of the installations, some of the exhibits. And as we move, I'll go really close. So we take the approach, of course, of going somewhat chronologically as the museum follows his historiography, but it's also topical. So you see these one-word headings that help you understand the context of how this unfolded. But right now I'm standing in front of an installation that is called Massacre. And it's about, of course, this aspect of the history that Father Patrick Dubois calls Holocaust by bullets. And we know that many Jews were murdered, not in places like Auschwitz or Majdanek or Treblinka, but even before that time period, often just outside of their towns, never even stepping foot into a ghetto or to a camp, murdered bullet by bullet. And so this is an often, and now it's becoming even more well researched, but was an often overlooked aspect of the history. And so this is a recreation of a historical photograph using tens of thousands of bullet casings. And I think why people talk about this so much is because you got somewhat of a view, but as you kind of come through this exhibition, you don't see it at first, but you kind of come around the corner and you don't really know what it is. You see sort of this art. It looks like art, and your eye is drawn to it. And then you look a little deeper and you realize what this photograph tells. And then you get closer and realize that it's made out of bullet casings, and begin to also accompanied by stories of, we have two local eyewitnesses who were witnesses to massacres such as these. We have other testimonies who speak to this history. And so it's something that a lot of people it stays with them. The other thing is that we've seen young people make a connection to this, which I'll tell you, a student once said as we were talking about this, so we named this massacre about this aspect of the history, and this student said, "We live in the massacre generation," and we didn't understand what was meant by that. But what that student was talking about was school shootings and the realities of mass shootings. And so, you know, people make connections to this and other parts of these exhibits in ways that we might not have even imagined. So this is something that I think really sticks with our visitors.
Exactly, and of course, Babi Yar is a site in Ukraine where they did massacre tens of thousands of Jews. It was through bullets. I mean, that's what they did. And now there's going to be a museum established there, finally, after all these years. And Natan Sharansky, who himself is a refusenik, is heading is chairman of the program of the group that's putting together the museum. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that for so many whose families experience this, you know, that this often hasn't been talked about because there are not as many survivors of these mass killings as there were of some of the camps. So I know there is this desire, especially even among our survivors here in Cincinnati from the former Soviet Union, who want this history to be documented and part of the narrative. And so I think the Babi Yar Museum, for that reason, is very important.
Yeah, it's just fortunate that they never built on it. I mean, it's
Right.
a ravine, and it goes on and on and on. You go there and you see. Yes, yes. So let's keep taking a look around.
Yeah, so we'll keep going, and we're going to pass a recreation of the Warsaw Ghetto Wall, and beyond the wall, as I mentioned in talking about graphic imagery, you have to actually look into the wall to see some of the graphic images and scenes of the ghetto. And we want our visitors to not know when they walk up to the wall, are they inside the ghetto or are they outside? You know, are you on the outside looking in, or are you on the inside looking out? And so we'll pass that. And then another aspect of the museum that I think really visitors find meaningful, and on a personal level, I find a lot very meaningful, is this installation called Deportation, which of course is about the stories of individuals being deported to all kinds of camps, including the killing centers. And so you have here, again, this interactivity. So this is not, there are some Holocaust museums that have original cattle cars. We do not have a cattle car. We have a recreation of a cattle car that comes out, and then you can view the testimonies of survivors. But what's so significant about this, and it may be hard to see virtually, I don't know, we'll see, is that beyond this cattle car, you can actually see a view of the railroad tracks leading to this building, Union Terminal. And again, for our visitors, it's an interesting sort of juxtaposition of what we think of trains when we think of the Holocaust, and yet the trains here and the tracks here led survivors to a new life, to rebuilding, and led World War II servicemen and women off to places where they fought on behalf of the war effort. So just sort of this duality of the meaning is something that's significant, and this is still actually, just so you know and your viewers know, still an active train station, mostly commercial at this point. But that's significant to our building and to our story here. And so I think that's a unique aspect as well.
Right, that's good idea to locate it where they did, so you can just look out and see the tracks.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you a secret that it was one of those things that was just beschert, because meant to be, because that wasn't in our original plan. But when we heard the trains going by and saw them as we were building out the space, we said we have to connect this. And so it just was good fortune that the design integrated with the narrative, and we were able to make that available. So we'll move further into the gallery. I'll mention a few more parts of the museum, and I want to make sure I save time for our second set of galleries, the Humanity Gallery as well. Also, I haven't talked a lot like other Holocaust museums. We of course integrate artifacts as well. I will mention one artifact as we move through. And this artifact that you see, of course, you know and identify as a camp uniform. It belonged to a gentleman named Leo Willick, who survived Dachau and Auschwitz. He came to Cincinnati via Union Terminal, this building, in 1949. He brought his uniform. Obviously, it was not typical that somebody would keep their uniform. Many survivors would throw them out or burn them. They were not something they wanted to hold on to. He held on to his. We don't know why, but we do know that he kept a journal, and in that journal, he talks about actually having the uniform in a box in his closet. And when he was having a bad day, he would actually take the uniform out of the box, put it on, and realize how lucky he was to be alive.
Wow.
Yeah, so anytime we need a little perspective on how fortunate we are, I just think of Leo and his uniform. And actually, you met Lilly at the beginning of this conversation. Her family was really good friends with Leo. As you can imagine, Cincinnati isn't a huge city, not a huge Jewish community. So the survivors were very, very tightly connected and knew one another and formed bonds and family with one another. And she remembers Leo very well. He never married or had children of his own, but he had a lot of honorary nieces and nephews.
Okay, now where are we now?
So we exited really the Holocaust gallery, and as you can imagine, it concludes with stories of liberation and justice and rebuilding. And then we transition, and there's a theater that transitions us to thinking about today. And so at the very beginning of the experience, actually there's a film that starts with stories and context of the history. And at the end of that, the survivors say to us, you're going to witness some of the darkest chapters of humanity. And you might ask yourself, what would I have done? But that's not the question. The question is, what are we doing for humanity today? And so this gallery, the second part of the experience, really asks us to reflect on what you just saw and heard and learned, and how you're going to turn that into action today. And so we actually focus on the concept of we all have within us character strengths and the ability to make a difference, that we learn from the history not to be bystanders. And instead, we encourage visitors to think about how they can become upstanders. That's on my mask. And make a difference, and that each of us has the opportunity to be an upstander in any moment. And so this gallery actually then brings to the visitors stories of upstanders. And as much as possible, we try to shed light on everyday individuals who have used their strengths to make a difference in various ways. So we cover topics from responding to genocide, protecting civil rights, sharing our world, standing up to hate, promoting pluralism, finding home, stories of individuals who, again, have seized a moment and made a difference. So I'm standing right in front of the installation, and you can kind of see the films in here are done in a very artistic way with sculptural elements in the background. But this is the zone about protecting civil rights, and we share several stories about protecting civil rights, a Cincinnati story, a fight for to ensure that the LGBTQ community wouldn't be discriminated against, which at one point was acceptable in Cincinnati. And we tell the story that everybody knows of the march in Selma and the relationship between Abraham Joshua Heschel and Martin Luther King Jr. And actually that has a Cincinnati connection, because Abraham Joshua Heschel actually spent his first 5 years in America here in Cincinnati. He was granted a visa to come to this country by Hebrew Union College here in Cincinnati. And actually this was a formative time for him to understand, unfortunately, that in America, of course, like everywhere else in the world, there were challenges as well. And he became passionate about the plight of African Americans, and eventually formed a relationship with Martin Luther King Jr. So we share that story. So there are a variety of individuals and moments in time, all the way up to our contemporary days, that we share stories of upstanders who have seized the moment and spoken out and made a difference.
Okay, where are we now?
So we're towards the end of the Holocaust exhibition, in an area we call Aftermath, and then you'll see Rebuilding as well. And Aftermath, of course, really tells the stories of what happened to these individuals and how they made it to the Cincinnati community. And again, we want our visitors to understand that, war ended in 1945, but the story doesn't end in 1945. It continues actually to this day, but we begin sharing sort of the various narratives of how individuals ended up in this community, and the paths that they had to take, some going to DP camps, some going to Israel first, some going to other places. And so it really follows some of the survivors that are featured throughout the museum. It follows their journey to Cincinnati and highlights it. And this is actually another installation that a lot of visitors talk about. I think the map, and maybe in a moment you'll see a little bit of sort of the paths that people took here, you see, are messy and are not linear, of course, because it was not necessarily easy in those post-war years to determine where you would go, if you would get a visa, how you would get there. And so this is where we're standing right now. And we'll.
You have docents who, some of them are survivors. Is that right?
So most of our docents are either some of them are children of survivors, and many of them are retired educators from all parts of our community, Jewish and not Jewish. And we also have survivors that speak regularly for us. So we have a speakers bureau, and some of those survivors do also take groups through the museum as well. So I would say most of our docents are not survivors, but some of the survivors bring groups through as well.
Right. And I'm told that you're now working on a holograph. Can you talk about that?
So we are working with the University of Southern California's Shoah Foundation. I'm very excited that we are going to be one of the sites to host the New Dimensions technology, which is it's an experience that's different in each museum. But not only is it a hologram, but most significantly, it's an interactive experience where you actually get to have a conversation with a survivor. And so survivors have been filmed in a very specific way, a very intense way, and asked more than 1,000 questions. And so you can actually ask the survivor questions as if they're there at your kitchen table having a cup of coffee. And so by the beginning of 2021, we will integrate a new gallery, which will include New Dimensions technology and survivors.
And you can ask, the machine has the ability to understand the question and then
Correct.
To select
Correct.
the appropriate answer.
Correct. It's an incredible technology. It utilizes artificial intelligence, again, I'll be very honest that when this first came out 5 years ago almost, a lot of us in the field were skeptical and nervous, and it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal, and it's had a very powerful impact. And some of the early research shows that, in particular for students, they're asking more questions to this hologram or to this sort of artificial computer version of a survivor than they would to a live survivor, because perhaps there's no inhibitions. There's a more willingness to ask questions that they would be fearful to ask a survivor in person. And so it's having a big impact. And as we know, one of the hardest parts of this work for any center or museum is that, we're losing that generation, and that more than anybody.
Right, exactly. So when do you hope to have it by?
Early 2021, so by the beginning of the year.
Wow, tremendous. And you think any of your own survivors will do taping?
We're not sure yet. The taping is a very intense, time-consuming process, and also just given the environment we're living through right now with COVID, I don't know if it's going to be possible, but there are about 20 survivors who have been interviewed for the project. and they all have incredible stories. And one of the things that we are being intentional about is selecting survivors who will be integrated into this, who have connections to stories and survivors that are in the museum.
Have you had a chance to look at any of the other museums? So about 20 of them, Holocaust museums in the United States. Have you had a chance to see many of them?
I have. I've been privileged to see many of them, Detroit, Skokie, Los Angeles, Florida, of course, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, Houston. Although, interestingly, Houston and Dallas just opened, both cities just opened new Holocaust museums within the past year. Brand new museums. I haven't been to either of the new museums. I was actually supposed to be in Houston in June. Obviously, that didn't happen.
Right.
So it's just interesting that these all three of our museums opened within sort of a year time frame.
Yeah, but each is unique, isn't it?
Each is
Even though they're
unique.
telling the same story, each is unique.
Each is very unique, and as a matter of fact, with Dallas in particular, we were comparing sort of notes along the way. We actually worked with the same design team. We not entirely, but some of our team was some of the same folks who are working on their museum. And our museums are, I can tell you, completely different. Not only in the stories we tell, but in even the approach and the way we tell it. And the other thing that's different is that a lot of newer Holocaust museums are integrating some kind of connection to contemporary issues or connections to the lessons of the Holocaust, but that varies dramatically. So, for example, in Dallas, they focus on human rights and a whole number of issues. So we're all doing unique things in while sharing the same history, to your point.
Yes, yeah, different approaches. Some believe that it's better to broaden it out and look at other people who have also been subjected to, problems. I'm thinking of 1914, the
Armenian genocide.
Armenian, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and some Holocaust institutions also don't want to do that and feel that they want to keep the uniqueness of this history. And so, there's a variety of certainly perspectives and interpretations. But yeah.
Exactly. Michael Birnbaum worked with you on this one. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, correct. Yes.
He's a well-known Holocaust expert. And what was he? Was there something that he brought that you can recall particular that he came in with?
Well, he and his partner, Eddie Jacobs, brought a lot of incredible concepts and ideas. Michael was steadfastly focused on the history and making sure that the historical context and content was included. And we actually had many and conversations and even heated debates about what to include and how to include, because we were adamant that our local survivor narratives needed to be told. And so we had to find a way to make sure we were doing justice to the history and the survivor narratives. And his partner, Eddie, and this is, because of Michael's partnership with him, really brought a focus on art. And there are several things, we didn't see all of them, but even in the upstairs in the rotunda, there are some sculptures that are in the rotunda. There's also in our lobby, and perhaps we'll go there to show you, there's a graphic novel mural that really introduces the experience. And so art was something that really came from Eddie and our director of education, Jody Elowitz. And Michael, again, he was really focused on on the history and the content, and making sure it was portrayed in a way that would do justice, not only for the history, but also, of course, the survivors. I'm going to take you into the lobby in a moment, but I want to mention this installation behind me, Make Your Mark. And this is actually really the end of the experience. And as you can see, photos are important. And we started in, I'll take this off. We started in an installation called Mosaic, which had photographs, and it closes with this Make Your Mark. And we invite visitors to take their own photographs and reflect on what inspired them, what they're inspired to do as a result of being here, and how they're gonna make their mark. And the idea is that once you come through this museum and experience, that you carry this story forward, and that you're part of the experience now. You're leaving yourself and your commitment to learning something from this and doing something as a result of it. This is the mural that's actually in the entrance of our lobby that is vignettes of more than 20 eyewitnesses that are featured in the museum. And this is original artwork, and we did it in a graphic novel style, in part because we're in a building that houses so many other museums. So we wanted to, as visitors come in, something that was approachable, accessible, they could connect with. And so, so it's a unique way to introduce some of the individuals that visitors would meet in the museum. And so we're standing here, one of the vignettes is of Warner Koppel. Warner Koppel was a survivor, was the first survivor in our community to begin sharing his story publicly. He survived Auschwitz, escaped a death march, ultimately met his wife shortly thereafter, came to Cincinnati in 1949, and actually talks about arriving in Union Terminal with a wife, a baby, and a suitcase. And he talks about arriving as being reborn, that's the moment, arriving in Cincinnati, where he puts his past behind him and starts anew. And so each of these vignettes offer a little snapshot into these survivor stories.
Fascinating. It's the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. We've been speaking with Sarah Weiss. Thank you so much. This is Stewart Ain, and this has been Jewish Life. Until next week, have a good one.